Hey everybody, this is just a follow-up video to the video I put out earlier today, The Plagues of Egypt Explained. I'll leave that link below. But the island of Santorini, that was the source of the biblical plague story in Egypt at the time of the Exodus. And I thought it was very interesting that it comes down around the time of Tutmosis IV. Now I wanted to look a little further at the date, and I found this book called The Plagues of Egypt, Archaeology, History, and Science. Look at the Bible. And it says this about the eruption of Santorini and dating it. It says the date for the event is unclear, though. Historians prefer a date around 1550 BC, although dates as low as 1350 BC have been previously suggested. Now, those are two dates that historians believe it happened. 1450 BC, 1350 BC, so right in the middle of that, let's say 1450 BC, that comes within 20 years or so of when I believe Tutmosis IV was named Pharaoh. So back 3,500 years, you come within 20 years, that's pretty darn close. Now, one thing has become clear to me in just looking over this Exodus story and the Ipuwer Papyrus, I believe it is called, from this text from ancient Egypt that tells of a great cataclysm and how it relates to the Exodus story. I believe one thing else is clear. Revelations, this trippy apocalyptic story that is put in at the end of the Bible, is just a reimagining of this horrific event that happened in Egypt about 3,500 years ago, where the island of Santorini basically exploded, and that whole side of the Mediterranean was greatly affected. We have evidence of a tsunami in the Israel area, so tsunamis probably raged all over the Mediterranean, and it was a great disaster. The ancient Egyptians would have had no idea that there was a volcano went off. They just would have had all the results of it, and they would have thought God is raining vengeance on them. So that is kind of the apocalyptic version of that story and how the ancient Egyptians would have saw it. But Revelations, I believe, is just a reimagining of that story, and I'm going to read a few verses from Revelations and how they relate to the Exodus story and what the Egyptians were actually chronicling at the time of Tutmosis IV around 3,500 years ago. This is Revelation 16:21. It says, "And there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And God was cursed because of the plague of hail, for the plague thereof was exceeding great." And that is one of the plagues of Egypt, hail, and I believe that relates to actually stones that were blown out of the supervolcano that would have reached as far as Egypt. This is Revelation 16:3 and 4. "And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. And the third angel poured out his vial upon rivers and fountains of water, and they became blood." And that's the exact story of the Exodus plague, where the river Nile was turned to blood, and red tide, that phenomenon is directly associated with volcanic activity, so that makes sense. This is Revelations 9. It says, "And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power." And one of the plagues of Egypt was locust, and this natural disaster, the eruption of Santorini, would have enacted many things strange happening on earth, and locusts certainly could have been one of them. But it's a direct tie-in to the Exodus story. This is Revelation 16:13 and 14. "And I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole earth, to gather them to battle of the great day of the God Almighty." And once again, I believe the ancient Egyptians thought this was God raining vengeance on them, this unbelievable disaster, and I explained it in my last video. It's one of the greatest disasters that man would have experienced in the last few thousand years. Now, let's tie this exactly into the story of Santorini. This is Revelations 8, and it says this in verse 8, "And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed." So this tells you the source of this apocalyptic disaster. It was a great mountain burning with fire that was cast into the sea. That is the exact story of Santorini, and here you see it, exploding, volcanic activity being cast into the sea. So I believe Revelations is a reimagining of this apocalyptic tale from 3,500 years ago in Egypt. Hope you thought that was interesting.